Hello, so I'm going to try and introduce the topic of the purges. This is generally speaking one of those topics that most people don't know an awful lot about. So when we talk about the purges, we might also call it the Terror or the Great Terror, or if we're talking specifically about the period between 1936 and 1939, we might call it the Yezhovshchina after Nikolai Yezhov, who's the head of the NKVD at this time. A few things just to introduce the topic um, are coming up. So, first of all, the party, as we know, had always purged itself. If you purge yourself, it means you get rid of things that are unwanted. You get rid of bad, impure elements. And so the party had always purged itself. If you look back to 1921, the Shistki in the middle of this table here, you can see that the party expelled a quarter of its members in that year. And so what would happen is the party would announce that it was doing a check, everyone would hand in their party cards, and then 25% didn't get their cards back. As you know, around about this time, Stalin was supervising the Lenin enrollment. And so this was one of the things that the party is doing. It's constantly renewing itself, getting rid of old members or members who've done things that the party doesn't approve of, and introducing new members. The party had also always used show trials, which are like criminal trials but with very, very high publicity. And this is a method that the party used to humiliate, to embarrass, to ridicule, and to demonstrate to everybody what was not acceptable. And so you can see a number of these show trials you need to know about. And they're used more commonly under Stalin than under Lenin, as you can see, but they predate the purges. You can also see that the party had always arrested and always executed people. You know from the Civil War period that the party was pretty ruthless in suppressing opposition, and so you can see right the way through the 1920s that arrest and execution was one of the things that the party was constantly doing to protect itself, to defend itself from enemies within and without. But you can also see that things change quite dramatically once Stalin's in power, and in particular after 1934, and then again after 1936 when Yezhov's in charge, and then 1937 you can see there's a significant change in the scale of the operations. And this is what's known as the Great Terror or the Purges. The question of why this happened is something that historians have been arguing about ever since. And the short answer is that no one knows for certain why it happened. In the early days, and these are the arguments of the so-called totalitarian school, and you'll find these arguments in your booklet at pages 70 and 71. In the early days, the totalitarian view was that this was a consequence of Stalin's totalitarian control. That because Stalin was a totalitarian dictator, because he was some kind of megalomaniac out to control absolutely everything, and because he was paranoid, the purges are the sort of natural consequence of those things. And so these are the arguments put forward really from about the 1950s, 1960s onwards. And you'll be able to see the connections between these arguments here and the traditional arguments of the Cold War historians from Unit 3. Then from about the 1990s you get a so-called revisionist approach to the terror, and the revisionists said various different things, but essentially they said that traditional totalitarian argument that Stalin was responsible was too narrow, too simplistic. It didn't do a good enough job of explaining the purges. And so some of them said actually Stalin had very little to do with it at all. It was a kind of spontaneous bottom-up kind of response. Others argued that it was definitely top-down, but it was, for example, the secret police, the NKVD, who is the new name for the Cheka, were really getting out of control. And some people said that it was a mixture of those different explanations. Then from about the 2000 onwards, you get the consensus view, and the consensus view brings all these arguments together and really says that no single explanation is good enough. It's a combination of all of these, and you'll find some examples of this consensus view on pages 74, 75, and then again on 76, 77. Cambridge have asked this question about why the purges occurred, and it's actually a pretty straightforward question. It's a bit like the question on why the Bolsheviks won the Civil War, in that there are a handful of reasons that have been suggested. You can't really go too far wrong as long as you know the arguments and as long as you know the evidence. So follow the tasks, work through the exercises on these pages, and let me know if you get stuck. Hope that helps.